reflected, I think that we just came from such a wonderful, warm session reflecting on the history, and now we're here in such stark environments reflecting on the present. So, metaphor intended. Come on, I would like to just introduce the guests who weren't with us at the previous session. We have from the Salinas Police Department, Commander Dave Crable. And Henry Gomez. Commander Crable is the area commander and has been a very active part of the Salinas Downtown Community Board and the Safety, Sanitation, and Security Committee that's been working here. And we invited them here to help us think out loud about the homelessness issue and how that connects to our work in cultural revitalization. Also, representing the city of Salinas, we have our city councilwoman, Representative Gloria De La Rosa. Gloria.
Yay, Gloria!
And we invited Gloria here again to help us think out loud about how our work here in the cultural revitalization can dovetail with, can spark, can be connected with the work that we're trying to accomplish in terms of homelessness and economic revitalization. Because as is clear, one can't happen without the other. And in fact, this session was sparked by our planning as we were thinking out loud. We first wanted to have the session of storytelling right here because we've experienced in the past when people come in here, the memories of the Republic Cafe really come alive. And we've had some really wonderful conversations and opportunities for people to share what this building and the history of this building has meant to them. And when we thought of doing that again, we said, oh gosh, we can't even access this building, so how can we make that happen here? Jeff, did you have?
Can we introduce Eugene in New York as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, so Eugene, you want to introduce yourself? Go ahead.
I'm Eugene Begay. I'm with the Salinas Downtown Community Board, and I'm also a reporter for Voice of the Street, a homeless newspaper.
And New York?
And my street name is New York. My real name is Alvin Collins, and you know, I've been asked to help in any way I possibly can, and I'm willing to do that. You know, for giving some ideas, or you know, whatever need to be done. I've been homeless out here for many years. I know a lot of people in this area. Been around this area for many years, so I'm very well known with it.
And Rena, he's one of our narrators.
That's correct. Two of our students interviewed New York earlier this month, or last month. And we thank New York for offering your story to us. I think that was really nice. Thank you.
And I think we've had another guest arrive who was with us earlier today.
I'm part of the ACE committee. I just had previous engagement.
So introduce yourself.
I gave Richard Villegas, and I was giving a presentation using this storyboard and some pictures I found at North Salinas High School. I just came from there.
Tell us who you were doing the presentation for?
Mr. Salcedo, his class was reading Joy Luck Club, and so I wanted some. He says, "Can you present something on Asian Americans in Salinas?" That's what I did.
So I'd like to start. I'd love for the people who were at the last session to just share one or two comments that might capture a theme, a sentiment, a feeling that you had from hearing the stories of people's history and connection to Chinatown that we might want to just fill this room up with. So do we have any volunteers to share just a takeaway from what you heard of the stories from Chinatown from the panel we just had?
Well, based on our walk back here a few minutes ago, the one word that came to my mind was family.
Family. Would you like to extrapolate?
Well, we were talking about the difference between the 60s and the present, and I just felt like I heard a lot about family, connectivity, and mutual support, you know, interconnectivity and mutual support from families, sort of family to family.
You know, one of the things I forgot to mention over there, and since we're here physically, it's a little easier to notice, is the neon sign. I think it's sort of a symbolic sort of a thing that happened in this early on. There's a group that, for leadership development, they have projects. So I pitched a project saying, why don't we redo this neon chop suey sign, which is common in many Chinatowns, but let's do it right. Neon, full neon. And, you know, usually the limit of these projects have to be done in a certain period of time and about $4,000 to $5,000. Well, they got enthused about it. We brought it to the community. They became enthused about it. Well, it ended up, it's cost $15,000 to put neon on that sign. But it was, quite frankly, quite easily done. And so that's kind of symbolic of the first major guiding light, let's say, that there's a project that can be done, and what that represents this particular building, and what's going to go into this.
I was thinking just yesterday that little sign is probably the catalyst that got the whole thing going, gave them enough impetus to keep going a little bit.
And one of the things they were concerned about, quite frankly, was this is, well, we're going to have to put plexiglass over it so people don't break it, and it's never been harmed. So it just sits, and not, unfortunately, it's just sitting here right now, but it does work. And that's the difference between our neon sign and most of the other neon signs in Chinatowns, which are just painted. This is like back retro to the originals.
Oh, I was two things with you. I was really struck by the neighborhood where people lived and worked in the same space, because that's often not true in California now. And the kind of sense of community that folks had. The other thing is, I love the woman's history. I just wanted to thank people for their stories of sharing that as well.
I think all the stories, especially shared with Wally and Ty, Chin, Wally and Ty, their family stories are the same as my stories, and it just really, it's a connection. It's every turn, the yummy houses, the tongs, the restaurant, they're all connected. We're all connected. We share the same kind of experiences in various degrees. So it was a wonderful thing.
Yeah, for me it was nostalgia. It was when people were talking like Wally and Wellington and Larry, it seemed that those experiences you had in the Chinatown area, you appreciate them more for some reason. Well, I did anyway.
I really heard the vibrancy and energy of the street and could feel it. And now being in this space, I just want to bring it alive.
One of the images that I thought was strongest was when they were talking about the music playing. And that there was music all the way from Mexican love songs to, blues and just pop music, R&B, that music represented all the diversity of peoples that were coming together there. And the second part, and I talked about a little bit when we were there, is the whole issue of resiliency, that the community internally sees itself differently than people see it from the outside. In your age, their perceptions of prostitution or gambling or, sort of like a place for the exotic. And I think that's partly true here now. That within the people that occupy the street now here, you must also have a sense of family and a sense of connected to each other, even though people from the outside will not see that when they drive by. So every time there's a community that passes through, there's both an internal life and an external view of that life. And that is part of what we'll deal with when we try to figure out how to make this really happen.
And what I said at the end of the session, which I'll repeat here today, is that how all these stories, although I'm not from here and I don't have an intimate connection, family or experiential connection to Chinatown, the stories have made all of this come to life for me. It's like a movie that's playing before my eyes. I can see and feel and smell and imagine, and that's what. From listening to all the oral histories that the students have collected, and just being a part of this over the last few years, you know, I really would love to see, it's partly bring that nostalgia away from nostalgia and into life, you know, to really kind of capture some of that picture that I'm seeing in my head. I'd love to see it visually externalized.
Yeah, I'm really struck by the sensory memories that I'm hearing also, and just how powerful those stories are, not just in creating nostalgia, but in kind of sparking this interconnectedness, you know, from everybody's memories, people who are also listening and reacting, and it also sparks my curiosity, because I hear little bits of stories and I want to hear more. Like, for example, the fact that many of the women of the night, were white women. So I'm thinking, what was the story behind that? What's their story? What were their beyond the economic transactions that we're making here, or maybe not just, including them beyond. So many stories yet to be told.
I'm just taken by such a theme in our conversation was the adult entertainment industry, and especially gambling. And as Jeff and I walked back around, there was a card game going on at that corner, and there was a dice game going on over here. And and at the same time, a recurring theme from this afternoon was, and it's a quote, "It was such a good place to grow up." Right? So even though we have this adult entertainment district, it was still a fabulous place to grow up. And I'm struck then with the disconnection to today. And what's happened, right, that we have an adult entertainment district, one could say, and you wouldn't really hear anyone saying, right now, it's such a wonderful place
There are no children.
to grow up. Yeah, it seems to me that there's a piece of the isolation that got strengthened here with the disconnection and the isolation of the roads and less circulation, less life coming into the neighborhood.
And also no commercial enterprises. I mean, there are a few around the perimeter, but really not day-to-day.
So,
It's just like I think I said, this area is always the magnet for these kinds of activities. And even in the 1800 maps, Sanborn maps, they show female boarding. Now what is that? What is that? That's that's the prostitutes. And they're between the dwellings of the Chinatown houses. So it's this area has always been the area where they have these activities, yet we still have the families. We grew up here, and it was part of their life. I mean, I never noticed. I thought prostitutes were the good-smelling ladies. That's part of it. I mean, it was just part of the scene, and it was just a passing scene, but it was part of my world. So I accepted it. But of course, people would ask, "Would you live down there?" Across the railroad tracks. But that's how I see it, and it's just been like that forever. That you have these elements, and we lived with it. And we make do with it. I guess we have to live our lives here, and then once we're able to, we move out.
You talk about in the overall context of it, if you want to have vibrant community and redevelopment, maybe that's part of the key, is there has to be families. We're not going to, there's going to be elements of what's here now will continue to be here. That's part of the community, but I think in order for it to upgrade to a vibrant community where everybody is a part of it, some changes, and part of that is going to be families versus just single people.
Children.
Children.
And part of as the revitalization project began to take shape, one of the concepts that emerged was the idea of eyes on the street, or, you know, if we're not happy with the kind of activity that's going on now, we need another kind of activity to happen. So we need to bring in people who are going to populate the neighborhood with other kinds of activities. So in that regard, the concept that emerged was catalyst projects, right? We need a catalyst project that's going to stimulate the arrival of new energy, new activities into the neighborhood. And in that regard, legitimate activities, right? Into the neighborhood. In that regard, this is one of our key catalyst projects, right? The Republic Cafe catalyzing then new energy, new kinds of commerce, legitimate commerce, new kinds of interactions on the block. So I guess we've got a foundation, and I would love to prove, right? And we've got some stories, and there's more stories out there. There's more stories out there, and I guess I would love to just help. I would like to invite Gloria and Commander Crable to think with us about, and anyone else really, about the process. You know, how might this really serve as a catalyst project, and how might this stimulate other kinds of projects to help address the issues that are on the street, the homelessness, the lack of place for people to go, and how might we be connected to that? I'm not asking you to solve it, but it would be great just to hear some of your thoughts to help the conversation move forward. So Gloria or Commander Crable?
Certainly looks like you're For those of you that don't know me, I'm Dave Crable. As Seth said, I'm the area commander and have been for the last 2 years in this particular area. And what essentially that means is that we have 4 different commanders in 4 different locations within the city of Salinas, north, south, east, and the downtown, Chinatown. And I actually have the airport responsibility as well, which takes a little bit of time. It's typically the downtown in this area here. I've had a good opportunity to spend the last 2 years down here, and certainly a lot of the culture and a lot of the history I wasn't aware of. Although working here for 26 years, you can't help but understand and notice the change. I've watched it over the 26 years. I spent a lot of my time out in East Salinas. But over the last 2 years, I've had an intimate opportunity to work with the community and others within the organization to come down here and try to affect change. And what I will say, a perfect example, as many of you know, we had the third sweep, if you will, the cleanup, however you want to term it, essentially came down. I think it's a necessary evil, unfortunately, but we were down here yesterday, and for those of you that would have seen it yesterday and seen it today, there's virtually no change. And so what I can say over the last 2 years, that these cleanups, although again, I do qualify in saying I believe they're necessary because of the health risk and the safety and that type of thing, it's not working. Our efforts just in doing that are not working. There have to be other solutions. I've maintained over the last 2 years that I don't have the answers for those. We are completely 100% a partner in this. We need all of the resources to work together in order to solve the problem. And certainly there are solutions out there. It's just a matter of us grasping them and making them work. There have been some improvements. We've affected some change in the criminal element where we've come down pretty hard this last year on the significant drug culture. But all that we have done is we've changed it. There have been people that we've removed, but they've been displaced and new people have come in. So, as we hit this aspect of it, they get replaced with others, and then it's a perpetuating cycle. So, if you want to say that it's been effective to removed certain people, yes it has, but it hasn't been eliminated. And I think that we can all agree that that certainly wouldn't be the goal to eliminate anything. That would be rather lofty, although ideal. It's trying to control, trying to make the neighborhoods safer. One of the things that I will relate to all of you is that I have a different appreciation for what goes on down here. I come down here and, as soon as I hit the corner, sometimes I get about half block. It takes them a little while to recognize my vehicle, and they start yelling one time. And all that does is tell everybody that the police are down here. And certainly a black and white is much easier to recognize than my black vehicle, but it's gotten so popular down here that they know as soon as they hit the corner, it's one time. I have walked all of these encampments. I've talked to a number of people, and I've gotten really good cooperation from people. We can be looked at from the law enforcement angle as the evil, the ones that are displacing people, or the ones in uniform. It's easy for everyone to focus their animosity towards us in what we have to do. But I will say that, it's not ideal, but people have been very cooperative in trying to allow for wheelchair access along the sidewalk. It's not perfect, but we do have that 2.5-foot barrier. As you see right out here, there's been a lot of work with SAC and the resources in trying to keep the front of the Republic cleaned up, and there's a lot of work that goes on there. So I've noticed there's a lot of cooperation, a lot of willingness. Unfortunately, when I'm asked, what are the solutions, what do we do, where do we go, I don't have the answers. And those resources may be out there, and I have, in my experience, found that there are a number of people that are out here on the streets because of choice. There are many people that are out here because of choice, and then there are others because of circumstance, as we will know. There's a combination of alcohol, drugs, and mental illness. And so when you can combine those, I don't know what the percentages are. Just thinking of it from that aspect, you can't treat each situation the same. So you have and then there may be more than I'm not thinking of, but 5 different angles that you have to consider. So that convolutes and complicates things as well. So whether it's opening up a piece of the city property and saying you can stay here, that may work for a portion of those people. Or we open up the Public Cafe or the Learning Center or Dorothy's or what have you. I think there are some things happening. Money certainly is always an issue in as far as the police department. I think we're part of that solution. It's just a matter of finding the right choices. So I have a different appreciation down here, and there has been a lot of cooperation, and I'm appreciative of that, because there is a job we have to do, but to try to make it as safe as possible. We can always improve.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.
Larry, any thoughts on where we are and the work that you've been doing with Don Reynolds and the homeless service providers? And, any thoughts on next steps?
Well, first I want to say I really appreciate all of you. I really want to thank the Asian community for staying here, because some other communities would have left. But you grew up here, and you stayed. I mean, when I talk to coworkers, and I tell them, you don't know there is a beautiful Confucius church by Gutierrez? You don't know there's a beautiful Buddhist temple right there, next door to it? It amazes me how many people don't know what we have here. And so my job is to educate them. And I'm proud of this community. And I tell them, you don't know how much work is being done right now by a group of a community that sees a vision that's going to be revitalized, that they have a heart. And I am just so grateful
But I have to tell you that, like Commander Gabriel said, I don't have all the answers. I know that we're doing our best to, you know, you have to be human, and, you know, and then you have to be setting some rules, like our commander just said, for what's going out here right now. But I am very grateful for this project and the vision of that we have, and that there's a lot of work still ahead to be done. And as you well know, we are having conversations with the County of Monterey, which I can tell you right now, I'm very disappointed with them, because they're social service providers, and they need to provide services. And so that what you just said, Commander, some of those community members that are out here right now, some of them need to be assessed. Who is here by choice, and who is here that needs services? And I'm sure there's some of them that need those services, but we need to bring in the service providers, because we need help down here. So that's one issue. And then the other issue is that we're doing the best we can as the city of Salinas. You know, Don Reynolds couldn't be here this afternoon. He's probably going to join us later, I think. But, you know, Don has done a wonderful job down here. It's not easy for him, and he's built up some partnerships with, I know, all of you, and if you know him, he tries to do the best that he can. And the warming center, we're talking about where is it going to be, and what partnerships are going to be created for that warming center. And then we know that maybe some of our residents will not want to go there. So, you know, what's the next step for those residents that don't want to go into a shelter? And then how do we help the existing ones? And how do we get more monies into this area? So it hasn't been easy, but, you know, we have a vision, and there's hope. There's always that hope, and I have never given up on hope, and I have always told people I'm very proud to be your representative. I'm proud of my community here, especially the Asian community, ACE, and all the work, the university. Thank you, Reina. Thank you, Zeph. You know, coming together and forming these partnerships that they're just great. And we look forward to again, building that vision that we have. And I'm so proud of the historians, all those stories. We should make a movie, that's what I say, or a book. But, you know, when you start hearing the stories, and I have my own, because I remember the Revancha, the restaurant, that Mexican restaurant down the street, that in the 70s, we used to come and have lunch there. And doctors would come from the hospital to have lunch there, from Memorial Hospital, because it was a good Mexican restaurant. And, you know, the nightlife that was going on, we wouldn't even mess there. We would go to the Mexican restaurant, and just a lot of memories, and a lot of my friends that grew up in this area. And one of them that I would really like to, and maybe some of you remember them, the Peñas, Herman Peña. I ran into Herman, and he was telling me his mom used to live up there, and she used to work in one of the cantinas, and he used to be a little kid that used to do the bolillo, you know, the shoe shine. And he was telling me the stories, and I said, Herman, you need to give that story. You need to give us that story. And he was just, you could tell in his face when he was telling me the story, how he went back, like a lot of us go back, and just reminisce, and you could tell just tears were coming down, you know, in his face when he was telling me about when he was like 7 years old. So there's a lot of other stories that need to be told. But yeah, Thank you.
Thanks, Gloria. Any other comments, any thoughts people would like to share?
I have a thought.
Yes.
And I'm a newbie, so you have to bear with me. Seth showed us a really important video this morning about the development from the point of view of CSUMB of the projects here, particularly around the needs of the homeless. Simultaneously, and in conjunction with redevelopment in the city. So then out of that came ACE, as I understand it, and that's who we work with now, our partners in the cultural thing. So it seems to me that there was an initial movement, and I'm just saying this from CSUMB, to help out in this area, primarily around homeless. But redevelopment was also interested in revitalizing. So out came support for the Asian cultural group. Then both things meet when we at the university get interested in working around a cultural center or a museum, because that's in our wheelhouse. It's about art and culture. But now I see that none of that, I'm going to be really frank, I think can ever come to happen to fruition unless there's a wider plan with sections that have to do with the housing issues, the health services issues, dealing with drugs and criminality, whether that's, drug rehabilitation, whatever it is, and if that can't happen somehow. And simultaneously, the steps that will need to occur for a cultural institution to be built. Now, this is a planning grant that we're in. That's why we're all sitting around this table now. We're trying to plan. If our plan turns out good and we give it back to the National Endowment for the Humanities, they potentially could allow us to apply for implementation grants, which are much bigger. And that's the money that helps you get that first step. So it seems to me that somehow we have to coordinate all those plans, because what we're really talking about, we know what the issues are. They're right in front of us. They're outside the door. They're even within the Asian communities themselves. Can you raise money for an institution that people might not clearly yet want to visit? So it seems to me that we have to figure out a plan that's large enough to bite off those pieces. Figure out a sequence, in other words, a timing for those plans, because each is dependent on the other. We can't move forward to get money for the implementation grant if in fact we really don't have the support to revitalize the area, and that can't happen without the issues of the housing, the health services, and the change that we're talking about. So, I love that. That's a magic. I'll stop talking. The light told me to shut up. Okay. But I'm saying that, we're here for a very specific reason, the cultural center. But it's so clear that that will never go forward in the way we imagine unless we see how we intersect with the other things. Like sometimes I start imagining, what if we start getting the money to do some of the building on this? Can some of the people who are here who are homeless because of poverty and unemployment who might want a job, can they work on this, refining the building, maybe just the raw stuff? I know unions, and I know because I've worked in other cultural institutions. Is there some role that we play, and I think Rena's already started it, by interviewing people in this area and allowing their stories to be woven into the stories of this cultural center? But that means also, like December 9th, when we invite people from this area to learn about the history of the place that they are now inhabiting. So somehow I think there's like a master plan that has to happen for us to fit into that. That's not to say we shouldn't envision exhibits and displays and all the things we came here to do, but it has to be sequenced. Otherwise, one will finish and the other will not be done, and we won't be able to accomplish it. So it's a very simple-minded way of saying we have to figure it out.
And in fact, go ahead, Rena.
I'd like to echo that from standing from where I sit, or sitting from where I sit, whatever. Is that I became part of ACE and to do a particular project with the students about gathering the stories, and the stories are the foundation. Without the stories, we don't have anything. But, because as one of our interviewees said, Chinatown is all about people. It's all about the people, and I agree, it is all about the people. Now, there have been different stages of development of plans. There is a master plan to build a social services campus on Bridge Street. There are different task forces, but the communication between them is not smooth. It depends on somebody contacting somebody else and finding out what that group said. There isn't like an overall, an overarching, everybody coming together to work this out. And I think, I think that includes the city. It has to include the city and not just one person from the city. It has to, I mean, if the city does not embrace this idea, let's just go home. I'm going to be really blunt. I don't want that to happen. But what I'm feeling is that every time we try to do something, there's an obstacle, and we've got to mobilize 5 different people to make something happen, because we're not all sitting around the same tables. And there are many tables, but there is no, I don't feel a sense of a smooth communication. I know at the last ACE meeting that I was at, which was a few before, we were talking about that we couldn't get access into the building, and so I got on the phone and I asked Jeff if he could come over and talk to ACE about what is going on from his end. That's the kind of communication we need to have as a smooth thing around the table and not have to go searching for it. We need to have a partnership from the city that says the city is signing on to X, Y, and Z to make this happen, and we're all going to work together. And that doesn't mean displacing people. It means integrating people. But it has to be something that the city is committed to doing and that we can count on that. Because otherwise, I honestly cannot go back to the National Endowment for the Humanities or the California Humanities Council that gave us money for what is, in everybody's eyes, a fantastic project, and ask for more money if we can't really implement it. And in order to get there, and I'm sorry I'm being really strident, but in order to get there, we've got to rethink how this communication pattern happens and who's at the table and where are the, is everybody in agreement with, as Amalia said, the schedule, here to here to here to here to here?
Well, Rita, the last time the city was at Ray Corpus said there was a master plan for the city, and this was sort of like third in the row of things to do. I mean, there is that $5 million deficit that they keep facing over and over, but in terms of how, when you say master plan, and I agree that there should be a master plan overall from the city, or a master plan here on this street?
A master plan that includes where everybody is together, not a city versus our group, but together a master plan.
So for example, here's a good example. We have the Chinatown Rebound Plan, which clearly says this is going to be commercial, and this is going to be cultural, and this is going to be, vibrant, and we're not going to chase out homeless. We're going to build a really quality, integrated facility, a campus where people don't have to sit on the streets and communicate. They can be in a courtyard where there's going to be drug rehabilitation services, and there's going to be healthcare services and mental health care services. And we've sketched out the square footage, and we've identified the terrain, right? So I think there is a plan, and everybody here, Dorothy's, all the social service agencies, the property owners, the city, the police were involved in the development of that, and everybody has bought into that. I think we just don't use it enough. And what's happened, I think, is that what we're working on here is so interesting to the national audience that we're maybe moving a little bit faster.
Yep.
Right? So because people can see that. How can you do this? You have the Japanese and the Chinese and the Filipino communities all talking to each other and envisioning something to work together that's going to help us understand migration and dislocation and becoming American. They get very excited about this. And in fact, if you look on the California Endowment for the Humanities website, our story is their cover now, with one of Wellington's photographs. It's that engaging, right? But that's moved forward to the extent so far that we haven't even done anything really on the Bridge Street property, or that whole concept hasn't really emerged yet in a way that's been embraced. And when the city of Salinas then starts talking about the vibrancy plan, there was a whole question on whether it should include Chinatown or not.
Well,
right?
can I say
And-
something?
and-
That's one of our top goals.
Right.
Our strategic goals. Hey, the revitalization of Chinatown, like the Allentown Marketplace. That's one of our goals.
It's key. And yet, we shouldn't have had to struggle. We had to go to numerous meetings to even have them consider the fact that Chinatown should be a part of the vibrancy plan. Why? Because they'd rather not think about it. And when we were at the Old Town meeting, Old Town Association would rather just say, let's send homelessness to Chinatown, that's where it's going to belong, and that's never going to get any better, and at least we'll have a thriving Old Town. Well, we've gotten beyond that, I thought. But then, of course, there's new constituencies, there's people new to the conversation, they haven't been involved in this work. So again, that's kind of the easy solution, is let's clean up our area and let's let homelessness go to Chinatown where it kind of belongs. So while we've moved beyond that, in some levels we haven't really, consolidated that plan. We joked the other day that we should have T-shirts. We should all have that image, the integrated plan, really visible, so that we can move in that direction. And one way to move in that direction would be to say, if this is going to be a cultural street, let's start now and make this a cultural street. And let's not have people sleeping on the sidewalks here. And let's find another place for people to sleep. And let's really move in that direction significantly and not see it as a negative, as it's going to detract from the development, but rather as a positive, that it's going to move from chaos to some kind of step that shows that we, the city, are united around a next step. And I guess we haven't been able to do that. When we had a really nice meeting with the city council, we didn't really have a plan to be able to present. Kathy was at that meeting, and we were right there, and they said, what can we do? We had 10 different ideas, right? We didn't even have a clear plan in terms of a next step. So I think you're right, Rena, and in that we need that communication. I think the pieces are there, but we just haven't really committed to this being a priority. And this means we can't just talk about the cultural revitalization without really making some significant steps around addressing the fact that there's 80 people. We're not Portland, right? We're not even Fresno, right, Larry? It's less than 100 people. That's what we're talking about. It's a couple of armfuls of human beings, and that seems pretty reasonable to address.
Why can't we get IKEA shelters that are somehow, they're insulated and set those up? Those aren't permanent, things, but I mean, they work for refugee camps. Why can't they work for homeless people? And it's not, you're not committed inside of a building. You have your own little, your own little shelter. And I mean, people need to be warm in the winter, okay?
Yeah, it's already getting cold.
And people need to have a sense of community, and there is a sense of community on the street. It's just a question of, can it be located in some place around it here? I'm not talking, but someplace where people feel a sense of belonging and pride and, and ownership, and this is my space and that's cool, and be a part of our, of understanding or recognizing that the story of the homeless, they've been here for 30 years, is part of Chinatown's story. And so therefore maybe we can all be working in the same, toward the same goal of having historical pride and revitalization along with, human needs. And that somehow or another, that's my hope.
Yes.
But I don't know. I mean, why not buy IKEA shelters? They're not that expensive.
But aren't these these action teams, the downtown, aren't they the people that can do this and then say, and work with us? Aren't they communicating with us right or wrong or what?
You mean?
Is that?
Well, there is the Chinatown Homeless Action Team, which is meeting and working on these issues, right? And then there's ACE, and I guess we just haven't done as much good communication as we could, I think.
Yeah. Because there is.
But we do really need to have the city, like, commit to this. Because if we don't have the city commit to it, we're gonna be spinning wheels and a lot of people's money and federal money and, I don't know, it just seems like we really need to make a very strong push with the city to have the city sign on to this plan and help make it happen, is my feeling.
And I guess part of that, Gloria, is to just,
Yeah.
we want you to know how much of a gem this is. I know you know that. But
Yeah.
this is a gem that we're in the middle of. And that the level of commitment from the community is so high. And how we can then help the city really understand that and really work with it.
Right, and so, like I said, they're purchasing some properties, and this is what I was told by my staff, and because I've been pushing the issue because I work for social services, and it's my community, like I said, and that's what I was told, and that we're looking at a partnership with possibly the Filipino community on using their facility for a warming shelter. That's what I was told, but that they're purchasing some.
That's not what Susan Arimas thought, she just told me 5
Oh,
minutes
did she?
ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so then that was changed in just today, but that's what I was told. Don isn't here, but if not, then we have to have a backup plan. And when we ask for those shelters and even bathrooms, and I'm gonna be very straightforward, what answer did we get? That we didn't have monies because people were asking. We were asking for bathrooms down here. It's always about that we don't have money and all this other stuff. But believe me, they're having some conversations, and that's the mayor. I wasn't in that meeting, but the mayor's been having some conversations with some of the churches, I believe, too. Yeah.
Gloria, I have a question. Would it be helpful if, as a group, we did come up with 5-point plan that we have generated and mobilized ourselves and went to every city council person, go once a month to the Salinas City Council meetings? Would that get some attention if we focused on 3 or 4 bullet points of what we want in this Chinatown area from the city of Salinas?
Well, I think so. I think if, and I think there's been some dialogue that has been happening with Don. Don is our city representative, or am I wrong? Because I know he attends all the meetings,
Yes.
the ACE meetings. And I think some
No,
of
he
these
doesn't
things
attend.
have been brought up.
He doesn't attend any.
Chinatown Community Board.
He's on community board. security.
Oh, okay. So that's where we need to hear, and